Welcome, dear listeners, to The Poison That Wouldn't Kill, a Miss Marple mystery. Settle into your favorite armchair, pour a cup of tea, and join us in the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, where secrets lurk behind every hedgerow. Our tale, narrated in the classic style of Agatha Christie, follows the sharp-witted Miss Jane Marple as she unravels a peculiar puzzle. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Whisper of the Roses. The village of St. Mary Mead, tucked into the soft folds of the English countryside, wore the autumn of 1952 like a well-loved shawl. Its cottages, their thatched roofs dappled with morning dew, glowed under the October sun. The air carried the scent of wood smoke and freshly turned earth, mingling with the faint sweetness of late-blooming roses. In this quiet hamlet, where every face was known and every habit catalogued, secrets were as rare as they were precious, until the morning when Lilac Cottage became the stage for a most peculiar mystery. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure with snow-white hair and eyes that missed nothing, sat in her parlor, her knitting needles clicking like the soft ticking of a clock. Her cottage, a neat affair with roses climbing the trellis, overlooked the high street where the village's pulse beat steadily. She was reading the St. Mary Mead Gazette, its pages filled with notices of jumble sales and parish meetings, when her maid, Cherry Baker, burst in, her apron slightly askew. "Miss Marple, you'll never believe it!" Cherry's voice, bright with her London roots, carried a note of excitement. "There's been a right queer business at Lilac Cottage. Mrs. Hawthorne's in a state, says someone's tried to poison her roses." Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze sharpening. "Poison, Cherry? That's a strong word for a garden." Cherry set down a tray of tea, the china clinking. "Not just any poison, miss. Arsenic, or so Mr. Pym at the chemist says. But here's the odd bit. The roses aren't dead, not a petal out of place." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "A poison that doesn't kill. Now that, Cherry, is worth a look." Lilac Cottage, home to Mrs. Lydia Hawthorne, stood at the edge of the village, its garden a riot of color that drew admiring glances from passers-by. Mrs. Hawthorne, a widow with 50, with a regal air and a fortune inherited from her late husband's pharmaceutical empire, was the undisputed queen of the St. Mary Mead Horticultural Society. Her Rosamundi roses, with their crimson and white stripes, were the talk of the county, expected to sweep the upcoming flower show. So when word spread that someone had doused them with arsenic, the village gathered like bees to a bloom. Miss Marple, invited by her friend Dolly Bantry, arrived at Lilac Cottage to find a small crowd. The vicar, Mr. Clement, murmuring condolences, Mrs. Price, the postmistress, whispering theories, and Constable Slack, notepad in hand, looking faintly exasperated. Mrs. Hawthorne stood by her roses, her silk scarf fluttering as she gestured dramatically. "It's sabotage," she declared, her voice carrying over the clipped lawn. "Someone meant to ruin me, to tarnish my reputation before the show. But look," she pointed to the roses, their petals vibrant against the green. "They're untouched. It's as if the poison mocked me." Miss Marple, her straw hat tilted against the sun, bent to examine the roses. The soil beneath was damp, with a faint, acrid smell. She noted a glint of glass near the roots, a shard of a vial half buried. "Curious," she murmured, her fingers brushing the earth. "Arsenic is a cruel choice, yet these roses stand defiant." Mr. Pym, the chemist, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, stepped forward. "I tested the soil myself, Miss Marple. It's arsenic, no doubt, but diluted. Should have killed the plants in hours, but they're thriving. It's unnatural." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the crowd, cataloging faces. Dr. Simon Hayworth, the village physician, stood with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed.
His interest in botany was no secret, and his own greenhouse boasted rare specimens. Beside him, Miss Clara Finch, a spinster with a pinched mouth and a rival's gleam in her eye, clutched her gardening gloves. Mr. Reginald Thorne, meanwhile, stood apart, his cane tapping the ground. "Waste of good poison," he grumbled when Miss Marple approached. "If I were to sabotage a garden, I'd do it properly." "You know arsenic very well, Mr. Thorne?" she asked, her tone light. "Worked with it for years," he said, his eyes narrowing. "But I've no interest in Lydia's flowers. She's made enough enemies without my help." Tommy Price, lingering by the garden shed, flinched when Miss Marple called his name. "Tommy, you tend these roses daily. Did you notice anything odd?" "No, miss," he mumbled, his cheeks flushing. "I watered them like I always do. Didn't see nothing strange." Miss Marple's eyes lingered on his boots, caked with fresh mud, and the way his hands fidgeted. "You're fond of Mrs. Hawthorne's niece, Emily, aren't you?" she asked softly. Tommy's eyes widened. "Yes, miss, but I'd never do nothing to hurt the roses." "Of course not," Miss Marple said, patting his arm, but her mind was already turning, piecing together the threads of motive and opportunity. As the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Bantry joined Miss Marple, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What do you make of it, Jane? A poison that doesn't kill. It's positively theatrical." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Theatrical, yes, Stolly, but every performance has a purpose. Someone wanted to send a message, and I intend to read it." They walked back to Miss Marple's cottage, the village settling into its afternoon calm. The church bells chimed, and a blackbird sang from a haythorn tree. Yet beneath the surface, Miss Marple sensed a current of unease. The poison that doesn't kill was no accident. It was a clue, wrapped in the petals of St. Mary Mead's most cherished roses. In her parlor, over a fresh pot of tea, Miss Marple reflected on the morning's events. Dr. Hayworth's muddy sleeve, Miss Finch's stained gloves, Mr. Thorne's bitter history, and Tommy's nervous glances, each was a piece of the puzzle. And then there was Emily, Mrs. Hawthorne's quiet niece, who had watched the scene from the cottage window, her expression unreadable. "The village is like a garden," Miss Marple mused, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Everything grows together, beauty, envy, secrets, but the roots always tell the truth." Cherry poked her head in. "You're steaming, miss. I can tell by that glint in your eye." Miss Marple chuckled. "Merely observing, Cherry. Now tell me, has Emily Hawthorne been spending much time with young Tommy?" As Cherry chattered, Miss Marple's mind wandered to the vial shard in the soil, the footsteps in the dark, and the roses that refused to die. The mystery of Lilac Cottage was only beginning, and she knew that St. Mary Mead, for all its charm, held secrets that bloomed in the shadows.
Chapter 3. The Weight of Envy. The late afternoon in St. Mary Mead draped the village in a gentle haze, the October light softening the edges of the stone walls and thatched roofs. The air carried a crisp bite, laced with the scent of fallen leaves and the faint tang of chimney smoke. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped over her shoulders, walked the winding path to Miss Clara Finch's cottage, her mind turning over the morning's revelations at Lilac Cottage. The arsenic that spared Mrs. Hawthorne's roses was no mere accident, she was certain, and the village's quiet charm masked a tangle of motives as intricate as the ivy climbing its walls. Miss Finch's cottage, a modest affair with a steeply pitched roof, stood at the edge of the village green, its garden a testament to her horticultural zeal. Her roses, though less celebrated than Mrs. Hawthorne's, bloomed with fierce pride, their petals a defiant splash of color against the autumn chill. Miss Jane Marple knocked, her keen eyes noting the freshly swept path and a single rose petal caught in a crack by the door, as if hastily overlooked. Miss Finch answered, her thin frame rigid in a starched apron. Her face, etched with lines of perpetual discontent, softened only slightly at the sight of Miss Jane Marple. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice clipped, "I suppose you're here about Lydia's nonsense. Everyone's talking about those wretched roses." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her tone warm but probing. "May I come in? Your garden is so lovely, I thought we might chat about flowers, and perhaps other matters." Miss Finch hesitated, then stepped aside. The parlor was a study in precision, doilies aligned on polished tables, a single vase of roses centered perfectly. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her eyes catching a gardening journal on the sideboard, its pages marked with a ribbon. "You take such care with your roses, Miss Finch. It must be galling to see Mrs. Hawthorne's always take the prize." Miss Finch's lips tightened. "Lydia buys her victories. Fertilizers, special soils. She spares no expense. It's not skill, it's money." Her voice held a venom that belied her prim demeanor. Miss Marple sipped her tea, noting a faint chemical scent in the air, not unlike the acrid whiff at Lilac Cottage. "You're familiar with garden chemistry, I presume. Pesticides, perhaps?" Miss Finch's eyes narrowed. "I use what's necessary, nothing more." She gestured to a shelf where bottles of plant food stood in neat rows, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered on a pair of gardening gloves tucked behind a cushion, their tips stained with a greenish hue distinct from the soil's rich brown. "Were you near Lilac Cottage recently?" Miss Marple asked, her voice as gentle as a breeze. "Mrs. Price mentioned seeing you by the gate collecting herbs at dusk." "That busybody. I was gathering mint for tea, nothing more. People see what they want to see." But her fingers twisted the edge of her apron, and Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in her eyes. As they spoke, a shadow passed the window, a figure moving swiftly toward the garden shed. Miss Marple's gaze followed, but she said nothing, letting Miss Finch's words fill the silence. "Lydia's roses surviving that poison, it's unnatural," Miss Finch said, her voice low. "If I were to sabotage her, I'd do it properly, not some half-hearted stunt." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Of course, but it's curious, isn't it? A poison that doesn't kill suggests someone knew exactly what they were doing." Leaving the cottage, Miss Marple paused by the garden, where a single Rosa Mundi bloomed, its striped petals a mirror of Mrs. Hawthorne's. She bent to inspect it, noting a faint sheen on the leaves, as if coated with a protective wax. Had Miss Finch been experimenting too, or was this another thread in the village's tangled web? Her next stop was the vicarage, where the Reverend Clement was pruning his apple trees. His wife, Griselda, a young woman with a penchant for mischief, greeted Miss Marple with a grin. "Jane, you're sleuthing, aren't you? The whole village is buzzing about Lydia's roses. I say it's that young Tommy Price. He's got shifty eyes." Miss Marple chuckled. "Griselda, you see drama everywhere. But tell me, have you noticed Emily Hawthorne lately? She's been rather quiet." Griselda's eyes sparkled. "Oh, Emily is a dark horse. I saw her at the library last week, poring over a book on poisons. Said it was for her studies, but she looked guilty as sin." The vicar joined them, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Emily's a bright girl, but she's under Lydia's thumb. That cottage is a gilded cage for her." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Emily's absence during the morning's commotion. A chemistry student, familiar with arsenic's properties, might know how to dilute it just so. But why? To frighten her aunt? Or to protect someone else? As she left the vicarage, Miss Marple passed the village shop where Mr. Reginald Thorne was buying tobacco. His stooped figure and sour expression marked him as a man nursing old wounds. She greeted him, her voice warm. "Mr. Thorne, you must find this business with the roses intriguing, given your expertise." He snorted, his cane tapping the pavement. "Expertise. Wasted on this village. Lydia's roses are a mockery, grown with wealth, not skill. If I wanted to poison them, they'd be dead." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "You worked with arsenic in your time, didn't you? At the Hawthorne Company." Thorne's gaze sharpened. "Aye, until they cast me out. But I've no use for petty revenge." He turned away, but not before Miss Marple noticed a smudge of green on his sleeve, like the residue on Miss Finch's gloves. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled by the fire, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. The day had woven new threads into the mystery. Miss Finch's bitter envy and stained gloves, Emily's secret of studies, and Mr. Thorne's lingering resentment. The greenhouse's chemical scent, the Rosa Mundi in Miss Finch's garden, and Griselda's tale of Emily's library visit formed a pattern, faint but growing clearer. Cherry bustled in, her apron dusted with flour. "You're deep in it now, miss," she said, setting down a plate of biscuits. "Heard at the shop that Dr. Hayworth's been ordering strange chemicals. Reckon he's up to something." Miss Marple smiled. "The village is full of stories, Cherry, but stories, like roses, need pruning to find the truth." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind sifted through the clues. The poison that wouldn't kill was a message, she was certain, crafted with care to unsettle rather than destroy. Was it envy, revenge, or something deeper, a plea, perhaps, hidden in the village's quiet heart? The answer, she knew, lay in the small details: a petal by a door, a stain on a glove, a shadow by a shed. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy facade, was blooming with secrets, and Miss Marple intended to tend them carefully.
Chapter 4. A Tangled Vine of Doubt. The evening settled over St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain, the village's lanterns casting a soft glow on the cobblestone paths. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of late honeysuckle. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl wrapped tightly against the chill, sat by her parlor window, her knitting idle in her lap. The mystery of the arsenic-doused roses at Lilac Cottage had taken root in her mind, each new clue a tendril curling around her thoughts. The poison that refused to kill was no mere prank. It was a calculated act, and the village's quiet surface rippled with hidden currents. This evening, Miss Marple had accepted an invitation to dine at Dolly Hall, the grand home of her friend Mrs. Dolly Bantry. The prospect of Dolly's lively chatter and a warm meal was pleasant, but Miss Marple's true purpose was to observe the village's pulse through its gossip. As she walked the short distance to the hall, her eyes caught the flicker of a lantern near the churchyard, where a figure moved swiftly behind the yew trees. She paused, noting the silhouette, too tall for Tommy Price, too slight for Mr. Thorne. A new player in this quiet drama, perhaps? At Dolly Hall, the dining room glowed with candlelight, the table laden with roast lamb and steaming vegetables. Mrs. Bantry, her cheeks flushed with excitement, greeted Miss Marple with a theatrical wave. "Jane, you're positively glowing with purpose. Tell me, have you cracked the case of Lydia's roses yet?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into her chair. "Not quite, Dolly, but the village is whispering, and whispers often lead to truth." Colonel Bantry, a bluff man with a penchant for military anecdotes, joined them, his mustache twitching. "Whole thing's nonsense, if you ask me. Someone's playing a joke, and Lydia's making a fuss to get attention." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Perhaps, Colonel, but even jokes have motives." As the meal progressed, Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "I heard something curious at the Women's Institute today. Mrs. Weatherby, she's the vicar's cousin, you know, says she saw Mr. Thorne near Lilac Cottage the night before the arsenic was found. He was carrying a satchel, and she swears she heard glass clinking inside." Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her basket, clicked softly. "A satchel, you say? Most interesting. And what of Miss Hawthorne's niece, Emily? Has she been about?" Dolly's eyes widened. "Emily? Quiet as a mouse, that one, but Mrs. Weatherby mentioned seeing her in the churchyard yesterday, digging near the old oak. Said she looked furtive, like she was hiding something." Miss Marple's mind turned to the churchyard, where she'd glimpsed that fleeting figure. Digging, hiding, Emily's chemistry knowledge and her absence during the initial uproar at Lilac Cottage were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. "And Dr. Hayworth?" she asked. "Any whispers about him?" Colonel Bantry snorted. "That chap's always poking about in his greenhouse, probably cooking up some new potion. Wouldn't surprise me if he's behind it. Botanical rivalry, eh?" Miss Marple nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. After dinner, she excused herself to stroll the grounds, her steps leading her toward the churchyard. The night was still, the stars sharp overhead, and the yew trees loomed like silent sentinels. Near the old oak, she found freshly turned earth, barely visible in the moonlight. Kneeling, she brushed the soil aside, revealing a small cloth bundle. Inside was a glass stopper, etched with a faint chemical symbol. Arsenic, perhaps, from a vial like the shard she'd found in Mrs. Hawthorne's garden. "A clue planted or lost," she murmured, wrapping the stopper carefully in her handkerchief. The churchyard was a favorite haunt of Miss Finch, she recalled, and Emily's presence here added another layer of intrigue. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the village library, a cozy building lined with oak shelves and the scent of old books. Miss Lavender, the librarian, greeted her with a smile. "Miss Marple, looking for a mystery novel, or are you solving one?" "A bit of both, perhaps," Miss Marple replied, her eyes scanning the room. "Has Emily Hawthorne been here recently? I hear she's fond of chemistry texts." Miss Lavender nodded. "Oh, yes, she borrowed a volume on toxicology last week. Said it was for her studies. Kept to herself, though, and left in a hurry when Miss Finch came in." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Miss Finch was here at the same time?" "Indeed. They didn't speak, but Emily looked unsettled, dropped her pencil and scurried out." Leaving the library, Miss Marple paused by the village pond, where ducks glided in lazy circles. The churchyard clue, Emily's library visit, and Mr. Thorne's satchel formed a constellation of suspicion, but something was amiss. The arsenic's failure to kill the roses suggested knowledge, not malice. A deliberate act to alarm rather than destroy. Was Emily protecting someone or deflecting blame? And what of Miss Finch's nighttime wanderings? As she passed the village shop, Mrs. Price, the postmistress, regaling a customer. "I'm telling you, it's that Clara Finch. She's been seen near Lilac Cottage too often, and her roses are just as fine as Lydia's. Jealousy, pure and simple." Miss Marple smiled to herself. Gossip was a double-edged sword, cutting through truth and fiction alike. She made her way to the tea shop, where Tommy Price was sweeping the steps. His face, usually open, was shadowed with worry. "Tommy," she said gently, "you mentioned finding glass in the garden. Did you tell anyone else?" He shook his head, his cap slipping. "No, miss, only you. But I saw Miss Finch by the cottage gate last week, after dark. She was holding something, looked like a bottle." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "You're a good lad, Tommy. Keep your eyes open, but don't fret." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her netting a steady rhythm against her thoughts. The churchyard stopper, Emily's library visit, and Tommy's sighting of Miss Finch wove a pattern, but it was incomplete. The poison's failure was the key. Someone knew the roses were treated to resist arsenic, a detail not widely known. Mrs. Hawthorne had mentioned using a special lime compound, a fact she'd shared only with her gardener and, perhaps, her niece. Cherry bustled in, her apron dusted with flour. "Village is in a tizzy. They're saying it's that Mr. Thorne's got a grudge big enough to poison the whole county." Miss Marple chuckled. "Grudges are common, Cherry, but cleverness is rare. This poisoner is both clever and purposeful." As the firelight danced, Miss Marple sifted through the day's discoveries. The churchyard clue, planted or dropped, suggested a deliberate misdirection. Emily's toxicology studies hinted at knowledge, not guilt. Miss Finch's nocturnal wanderings and Mr. Thorne's satchel pointed to opportunity, but the motive remained elusive. St. Mary Mead, with its cozy cottages and blooming gardens, was a stage for a quiet drama, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover its script. Chapter 5. A Glimmer in the Soil. The morning sun rose over St. Mary Mead, its rays piercing the mist that clung to the village like a delicate veil. The cottages, their windows glinting like curious eyes, stood sentinel over the quiet lanes, where the scent of fresh bread from the bakery mingled with the earthy tang of autumn. Miss Jane Marple, her hands busy with a skein of pale blue wool, sat in her garden, her gaze drifting to the roses that nodded gently in the breeze. The mystery of the arsenic-doused Rosa Mundi at Lilac Cottage had deepened, each clue a pebble dropped into the still pond of the village's life, sending ripples through its secrets. Today, Miss Marple resolved to speak with young Tommy Price, the gardener's apprentice, whose nervous glances and halting words suggested he knew more than he let on. She found him at the edge of Mrs. Hawthorne's garden, his rake moving slowly through the gravel path, his cap pulled low. The roses, untouched by the arsenic, bloomed with defiant beauty, their crimson and white stripes a silent challenge to the village's whispers. "Good morning, Tommy," Miss Marple called, her voice as warm as the sunlight. "You've done wonders with these roses. They seem to thrive despite their troubles." Tommy started, his rake clattering against a stone. "Morning, Miss Marple," he stammered, his freckled face flushing. "I just do what Mrs. Hawthorne tells me. Water, prune, nothing fancy." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, noted the tremor in his hands. "You're modest, Tommy, but a garden like this holds secrets, doesn't it? Like that glass you found and buried." His eyes widened, darting to the flower bed. "I didn't mean no harm, miss. Thought it'd cause a fuss. It was just a bit of glass, like from a bottle." "Like the one that held the arsenic, perhaps?" she asked, gently, her tone inviting trust. He swallowed, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I don't know, miss. I saw it near the roses, glittering in the moonlight. I pushed it deeper so no one would trip on it." Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloging the detail. The shard she'd found, and now the glass stopper from the churchyard, suggested a careless or deliberate trail. "Did you see anyone else in the garden that night, Tommy? Someone who might have left such a thing?" He hesitated, then whispered. "I heard a rustle by the hedge near the back gate. Thought it was a fox at first, but it moved like a person. Too dark to see, but they were quick, like they didn't want to be caught." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "You've got a good eye, Tommy, and a good heart, I think.
especially for Miss Emily. Tommy's blush deepened, his boots scuffing the gravel. She's kind, miss. Always talks to me like I matter. Not like Mrs. Hawthorne, always barking orders. Miss Marple patted his arm. Love makes us bold, Tommy, but it can also make us reckless. Be careful what you keep to yourself. Leaving the garden, Miss Marple walked toward the village hall where the Horticultural Society was preparing for the upcoming flower show. The hall buzzed with activity, women arranging vases, men debating soil pH, and the air thick with the scent of blooms and rivalry. Mrs. Hawthorne stood at the center, her silk dress a stark contrast to the practical aprons around her, directing the placement of her roses with a conductor's precision. Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Your roses are the talk of the village, Miss Hawthorne. It's remarkable how they've endured." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, though her smile remained. "They're stronger than any poison, Miss Marple. I use a special lime compound, my late husband's formula. Keeps pests at bay and, it seems, arsenic too." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "A formula? How fascinating! Did you share it with anyone? Your niece, perhaps?" Mrs. Hawthorne's laugh was sharp. "Emily? She's too busy with her books to care about gardening. No, only my gardener knows it, and he's loyal as they come." But Miss Marple noted the flicker of unease in her eyes, as if the mention of Emily stirred something unspoken. She moved on, mingling with the society members, her ears attuned to the undercurrents of gossip. Mrs. Weatherby, the vicar's cousin, was holding court near a display of dahlias, her voice carrying over the chatter. "It's that Dr. Hayworth, mark my words. I saw him in his greenhouse last night, mixing something in a vial. Looked suspicious, if you ask me." Miss Marple, pretending to admire a peony, listened closely. Dr. Hayworth's greenhouse, with its array of chemicals, was a plausible source for the arsenic, but his cousin's connection to the Hawthorne family lingered in her thoughts. She slipped away, her steps leading her to the village well, a quiet spot where she could think undisturbed. There she encountered Miss Clara Finch, filling a bucket with water, her face set in its usual frown. "Miss Marple," she said, her tone curt, "still poking about that silly rose business?" "Merely curious," Miss Marple replied, her eyes catching a glint of metal in Miss Finch's basket. A small trowel, its blade stained with a faint green residue. "You're diligent with your garden, Miss Finch. Do you ever use lime compounds like Mrs. Hawthorne?" Miss Finch's hand tightened on the bucket. "Lime? I've no need for such nonsense. My roses thrive on good soil and hard work." But her eyes darted away, and Miss Marple noted the nervous twitch of her fingers. As she returned home, the village settling into the midday hush, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the lime compound. Mrs. Hawthorne's confidence in its protective qualities suggested someone knew it would neutralize the arsenic, a fact not widely known. Emily, with her chemistry studies, might have deduced it, or perhaps Dr. Hayworth, with his botanical expertise. Miss Finch's trowel and Tommy's rustling figure by the hedge added new strands to the web. At her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her chintz chair, her knitting resuming its soft rhythm. Cherry bustled in, her apron smudged with jam. "Village is all abuzz, miss. They're saying Miss Finch was seen arguing with Mrs. Hawthorne at the hall. Something about unfair judges for the flower show." Miss Marple chuckled. "Rivalry is a potent fertilizer, Cherry, but this mystery grows from deeper roots." As the sunlight streamed through the window, Miss Marple's mind sifted through the morning's clues. Tommy's buried glass, Mrs. Hawthorne's lime compound,
Miss Finch's stained trowel, and Mrs. Weatherby's tale of Dr. Hayworth's vials. The poison that wouldn't kill was a signal, not a weapon, crafted by someone with knowledge and intent. Was it a warning, a diversion, or a plea for attention? St. Mary Mead, with its blooming gardens and whispered secrets, held the answer, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were fixed on its shadows.
Chapter 6. The Scent of Deception. The midday sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, its golden light weaving through the branches of ancient elms, casting dappled patterns on the village's winding paths. The air was alive with the hum of bees and the distant chime of the church clock, marking the hour with a solemn grace. Miss Jane Marple, her straw hat tilted against the glare, walked slowly toward the village hall, her mind a tapestry of clues woven from the past day's discoveries. The arsenic that spared Mrs. Hawthorne's roses was no accident, she knew, but a carefully orchestrated act, its purpose as elusive as the shadows shifting beneath the trees. The village hall, festooned with banners for the upcoming flower show, buzzed with anticipation. Inside, members of the Horticultural Society fussed over their displays, their voices a blend of pride and rivalry. Miss Marple slipped in quietly, her presence as unobtrusive as a sparrow, her eyes scanning the room. Mrs. Hawthorne stood by her Rosa Mundi, their vibrant petals drawing admiring glances, while Miss Clara Finch adjusted her own roses with a scowl. Dr. Simon Hayworth lingered near a table of orchids, his expression distracted, and young Tommy Price hovered by the door, his cap clutched tightly. Miss Marple approached Mrs. Hawthorne, her smile gentle. "Your roses are the star of the show, Mrs. Hawthorne. It's remarkable how they've weathered their ordeal." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes gleamed with triumph. "They're indomitable, Miss Marple. My husband's lime compound is a miracle. Keeps even poison at bay. I've half a mind to enter it in the show as a secret weapon." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "A closely guarded secret, I presume, shared only with your gardener." "And my niece, Emily," she said, her tone softening. "She's clever, you know, always tinkering with her chemistry books, but she's no gardener." Miss Marple nodded, her mind catching on Emily's name. The girl's absence during the initial uproar, her toxicology studies, and her quiet presence in the village's corners suggested a mind at work. She moved toward Miss Finch, who was fussing over a vase of crimson blooms. "Your roses are lovely, Miss Finch," Miss Marple said. "Do you ever experiment with compounds like Mrs. Hawthorne?" Her hand froze mid-adjustment. "I've no need for tricks," she snapped. "My roses stand on their own merit." But Miss Marple noted a small vial in her basket, half hidden beneath a cloth, its label obscured but glinting with a faint green residue. As she mingled, Miss Marple overheard a snippet of conversation near the tea urn. Mrs. Weatherby, the vicar's cousin, was whispering to a group of women. "I saw young Tommy near the churchyard last night, digging by the old oak. Looked like he was hiding something. Shifty, that boy." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. The churchyard, where she'd found the glass stopper, was becoming a nexus of secrets. She slipped outside, her steps leading her to the ancient oak, its gnarled roots sprawling like the village's own tangled history. The soil beneath was undisturbed now, but she knelt, her fingers brushing the earth. A faint glint caught her eye. A tiny metal clasp, like one from a lady's handbag, half buried in the dirt. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind racing. Whose bag? Miss Finch's, perhaps? Or Emily's? Her next stop was the village bakery, where the scent of fresh scones enveloped her. Mr. Reginald Thorne sat at a corner table, his cane propped against the wall, his face a mask of discontent. Miss Marple joined him, her voice warm. "Mr. Thorne, you must find this rose business tiresome with your knowledge of chemistry." He grunted, stirring his tea. "Tiresome? It's a farce. Lydia's roses surviving arsenic. It's no miracle. It's science. Someone knew that lime compound would neutralize it. Amateur work, if you ask me." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "You worked with such compounds at the Hawthorne Company, didn't you? Before your departure." His jaw tightened. "Aye, until they discarded me like old stock.
but I've no interest in their games." His sleeve, she noted, bore a faint green stain, like the one on Miss Finch's vial and trowel. As she left the bakery, Miss Marple passed the village pump, where Dr. Hayworth was filling a jug. His face, usually composed, was etched with worry. "Miss Marple," he said, forcing a smile, "still unraveling our little mystery?" "Trying to, Doctor," she replied. "Your greenhouse must be a treasure trove of solutions. Have you ever used lime compounds in your experiments?" He hesitated, his jug sloshing slightly. "Lime, occasionally for soil balance, but nothing like Lydia's formula." His eyes flicked to the pump where a small puddle reflected a greenish sheen, as if something had spilled. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. Cherry bustled in, her apron dusted with sugar. "Village is in a right state, miss. They're saying Tommy's the culprit, caught digging in the churchyard. And Mrs. Weatherby swears she saw Dr. Hayworth tossing something in the pond last night." Miss Marple chuckled. "The pond, the churchyard, the roses, St. Mary Mead is blooming with tales, Cherry." She unwrapped the metal clasp, turning it in her fingers. It was delicate, engraved with a tiny rose. Emily's handbag had such a clasp, seen at the vicarage tea. The churchyard was tying the suspects together. Tommy's digging, the glass stopper, and now this clasp. The lime compound, known to Emily and perhaps Dr. Hayworth, was the key. The poison's failure was no accident, but a calculated gesture. As the afternoon light faded, Miss Marple's mind sifted through the day's clues. Miss Finch's hidden vial, Thorne's chemical knowledge, Dr. Hayworth's spilled puddle, and Tommy's nocturnal digging. The village, with its cozy facades and blooming gardens, was a stage for deception, and the poison that wouldn't kill was a line in a script she was only beginning to read. Someone was orchestrating this drama, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were fixed on the shadows, waiting for the next act to unfold.
Chapter 7. A Crack in the Facade. The afternoon in St. Mary Mead unfolded with a deceptive calm, the village basking in the soft October light that gilded the rooftops and sparkled on the dew-kissed grass. The scent of wood smoke curled through the air, mingling with the faint perfume of late-blooming lavender. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting basket tucked under her arm, walked the narrow lane toward the vicarage, her mind a whirl of threads drawn from the mystery of Lallet Cottage's unpoisoned roses. The arsenic, diluted to spare the Rosamundi, was a deliberate act, she was certain, and the village's cozy surface hid a motive as subtle as the shadows lengthening across the green. Her destination was the vicarage, where Emily Hawthorne, Mrs. Hawthorne's quiet niece, was known to spend her afternoons reading to the vicar's children. Miss Marple's discovery of the rose-engraved clasp in the churchyard, alongside Tommy's tale of digging and the glass stopper, pointed to Emily as a figure of interest. A chemistry student with access to her aunt's lime compound formula, Emily held knowledge that could unravel the puzzle, or tie it in tighter knots. The vicarage garden was a riot of autumn color, with chrysanthemums nodding beside a swing where two children giggled. Emily sat on a bench, a book open on her lap, her dark hair falling over her face like a curtain. She looked up as Miss Marple approached, her eyes wary but polite. "Miss Marple," she said, closing the book. A volume on plant pathology, Miss Marple noted. "Are you here for the children's reading?" "Partly, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her voice as warm as the sunlight. "I also hoped to chat with you. You've a keen mind for science, I hear. Tell me, do you ever experiment with your aunt's roses?" Emily's fingers tightened on the book. "Aunt Lydia's roses? No, I'm no gardener. I study chemistry, but it's all theory, books and lectures." Her voice was steady, but her gaze flicked to the garden path where a small trowel lay half hidden in the grass, its handle worn and flecked with green. Miss Marple smiled, settling beside her. "Your lime compound is quite remarkable, isn't it? Protecting roses from arsenic, it's almost like magic." Emily's cheeks paled slightly. "It's just chemistry," she said quickly. "Aunt Lydia guards that formula like a treasure. Only she and Mr. Grayson, the gardener, know it." "And you, perhaps," Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. Emily hesitated, then shook her head. "I've read about such compounds, but I've never used them." Her fingers brushed the clasp of her handbag, identical to the one Miss Marple had found, and she quickly tucked it out of sight. As they spoke, the vicar's wife Griselda emerged with a tray of lemonade, her cheerful voice cutting through the tension. "Jane, you're a marvel, always sniffing out secrets. Emily, tell her about that odd letter you got. Anonymous, wasn't it?" Emily's eyes widened, and Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "A letter, Emily?" she asked. "It was nothing," Emily said, her voice tight. "Just a note, left in my coat pocket at the library. Said something about the roses hiding the truth. I threw it away." Miss Marple's mind raced. An anonymous note, left where Emily would find it, suggested someone was watching her closely, perhaps to warn or to taunt. "Did you recognize the handwriting?" "No," Emily said, too quickly. "It was printed, block letters. Probably a prank." Miss Marple nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She thanked Emily and Griselda, then strolled toward the village green where the flower show preparations were in full swing. The air buzzed with chatter, and Miss Marple's ears caught a new rumor. Mr. Reginald Thorne had been seen near the village well, tossing something into its depths. She detoured to the well, its stone rim worn smooth by centuries of hands. Peering in, she saw only darkness, but the faint glint of metal caught her eye. A small key lodged in a crack. She retrieved it, noting its intricate design, unlike any she'd seen in the village. Her next encounter was with Dr. Simon Hayworth, whom she found tending a bed of herbs outside his surgery. His hands, usually steady, fumbled with a sprig of rosemary as she approached. "Miss Marple," he said, his smile strained. "Still chasing our little mystery?" "Merely observing, Doctor. I hear you've been experimenting with protective compounds for plants. Anything like Mrs. Hawthorne's lime formula?" He laughed, a touch too loudly. "My experiments are modest, Miss Marple, nothing so sophisticated. But I'll admit, Lydia's roses are a marvel. Almost too perfect." His eyes flicked to a small shed behind his surgery, its door slightly ajar, revealing a stack of chemical bottles. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the shed. "You keep your supplies well organized, I see. Any chance a bottle of arsenic went missing?" Dr. Hayworth's face tightened. "My inventory is meticulous, nothing's missing." But his fingers brushed a keyhole on the shed door, and Miss Marple noted its similarity to the key in her pocket. As she left, the village clock struck 3, its chimes echoing over the green. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the anonymous note, the key, and Emily's nervous denial. The churchyard clasp, Tommy's digging, and now this key suggested a trail of deliberate clues, or misdirection. The poison that wouldn't kill was a message crafted by someone who knew the roses would survive. Was it Emily, driven by a hidden grievance? Dr. Hayworth, protecting a secret tied to his cousin's death? Or Mr. Thorne, nursing an old wound? St. Mary Mead's cozy charm hid a deeper truth, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were fixed on its unraveling.
Chapter 8. The Unseen Thread. The late afternoon draped St. Mary Mead in a golden hush, the October sun casting long shadows across the village's cobbled lanes and thatched roofs. The air held a crisp edge, scented with the faint musk of fallen leaves and the distant warmth of baking bread. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl drawn close, sat on a bench by the village pond, her knitting needles idle as her mind wove through the intricate clues of the Lilac Cottage mystery. The arsenic that spared Mrs. Hawthorne's roses was a deliberate act, its failure no accident, but a carefully crafted signal. The rose-engraved key from the well, Emily's anonymous note, and the whispers of the village were threads in a tapestry she was beginning to discern. Today, Miss Marple decided to visit Mr. Reginald Thorne's cottage, a cluttered haven of books and chemical relics at the edge of the village. His bitter history with the Hawthorne family and the green-stained sleeve she'd noted made him a figure worth probing. As she approached, the cottage's sagging gate creaked, and she spotted a single Rosamundi blooming defiantly in his neglected garden, a mirror of Mrs. Hawthorne's prize flowers. She knocked, her sharp eyes catching a flicker of movement behind a dusty curtain. Mr. Thorne opened the door, his cane tapping the floorboards, his face etched with suspicion. "Miss Marple, come to accuse me of poisoning roses, have you?" "Not at all, Mr. Thorne," she replied, her voice as soothing as chamomile tea. "I'm merely curious about your garden. That Rosamundi is striking, almost as fine as Mrs. Hawthorne's." His eyes narrowed, but he gestured her inside. The parlor was a chaos of papers and vials, the air heavy with the tang of old chemicals. A shelf held a row of bottles, one labeled arsenic solution, industrial, its cap slightly askew. Miss Marple's gaze lingered, noting the faint green smudge on the bottle's neck, like the stains on Miss Finch's trowel and Dr. Haworth's shed. "You've kept your chemist's tools," she said lightly. "Do you still experiment, perhaps with plant compounds?" He snorted, settling into a worn chair. "Haven't touched that stuff in years. Lydia's roses. If I wanted them dead, they'd be ash by now. Whoever used that arsenic was a fool, knew it wouldn't work." Miss Marple's lips twitched. A fool, or someone very clever. The rose's survival suggests knowledge of Mrs. Hawthorne's lime compound. You worked on such formulas, didn't you? His hand tightened on his cane. "Aye, before they sacked me. But I've no interest in their games." His eyes flicked to a small key on the table, its rose motif catching the light, a twin to the one from the well. Miss Marple's mind raced. "A lovely key," she said, her tone casual. "Does it open something special?" His face darkened. "Just an old box. Nothing to do with roses." He swept the key into a drawer, but not before Miss Marple noted its worn edges, suggesting frequent use. Leaving the cottage, she strolled toward the village shop where the postmistress, Mrs. Price, was sorting letters with her usual fervor. "Miss Marple," she called, leaning over the counter. "Heard the latest? Young Tommy Price was seen sneaking into Dr. Haworth's greenhouse last night. Up to no good, I reckon." Miss Marple smiled. "Tommy's a busy lad, it seems. Any other sightings?" Mrs. Price lowered her voice. "Well, I shouldn't say, but Miss Finch was near the shop yesterday, dropping a letter in the postbox. Looked nervous, like she didn't want to be seen." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, her thoughts turning to the anonymous note Emily had mentioned. A letter posted by Miss Finch, perhaps. She made her way to the church, where the vicar, Mr. Clement, was tending the flower beds. His gentle demeanor belied a keen observer's eye, and Miss Marple valued his insights. "Mr. Clement," she said, pausing by a bed of asters, "have you noticed anything odd about Emily lately? She seems burdened." The vicar straightened, wiping his hands. "Emily's a quiet soul, but yes, she's been distracted. I saw her in the church yesterday, lighting a candle. She looked troubled, muttering something about making things right." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Did she say anything else?" "Not to me," he replied, "but she left a scrap of paper in the pew, looked like a list. I didn't read it, of course." Miss Marple nodded, her mind on the church's quiet corners. She slipped inside, the cool stone soothing after the sun's warmth. In the pew where Emily often sat, she found a crumpled note, its edges torn. The words scrawled in pencil read, "Lime, arsenic, timing, tell no one." Her heart quickened. This was no prank, but a plan, and Emily's hand seemed to trace its edges. As she left the church, she passed Dr. Haworth's surgery, where the doctor was locking his shed. His face, pale in the fading light, betrayed a flicker of unease. "Miss Marple," he said, forcing a smile, "still unraveling our rose mystery?" "Bit by bit, doctor. I found a key by the well, rose engraved, like one for a shed. Yours, perhaps?" His hand froze on the lock. "A key? No, mine's accounted for." But his eyes darted to the shed, and Miss Marple noted a faint tremble in his fingers. Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire,
her knitting a soft counterpoint to her racing thoughts. Cherry bustled in, her apron dusted with cinnamon. "Village's wild, miss. They're saying Emily's been sneaking about with Tommy, planning something wicked." Miss Marple chuckled. "Wickedness is a strong word, Cherry. But secrets, like roses, need light to bloom." She turned the church note in her fingers, its words, lime, arsenic, timing, echoing the mystery's heart. Thorne's key, Emily's list, Dr. Hayworth's shed, and Miss Finch's nervous letter formed a pattern, but the motive remained elusive. The poison that wouldn't kill was a message, crafted by someone who knew the rose's secret resilience. Was it Emily, driven by a need to escape her aunt's control? Thorne, settling an old score? Or Dr. Hayworth hiding a truth tied to his cousin's death? St. Mary Mead's quiet charm veiled a deeper drama, and Miss Marple's sharp eyes were fixed on its unfolding.
Chapter 9. The Unveiling of the Thorn. The twilight over St. Mary Mead cast a soft lavender glow, the village's cottages huddling under the fading light like old friends sharing secrets. The air was cool, laced with the scent of damp moss and the faint sweetness of fading roses. Miss Jane Marple stood in the garden of Lilac Cottage, her shawl drawn tight, her eyes bright with the clarity of a puzzle nearing its solution. The arsenic that spared Mrs. Hawthorne's Rosamundi was no accident, but a carefully woven thread in a tapestry of motives and misdirection. The rose-engraved key, Emily's cryptic note, and the village's whispers had led her here, to a moment of reckoning. Mrs. Hawthorne had agreed to host a small gathering in her drawing room, a pretext for Miss Marple to assemble the key figures: Dr. Simon Hayworth, Miss Clara Finch, Mr. Reginald Thorne, Tommy Price, and Emily Hawthorne. The room, aglow with lamplight, smelled of beeswax, and the roses displayed proudly on a polished table. The suspects sat stiffly, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease, as Miss Marple took her place by the fireplace, her demeanor calm but commanding. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady as her knitting needles. "The matter of the poisoned roses has troubled our village, but tonight I believe we can lay it to rest. The arsenic that wouldn't kill was no mistake. It was a message, crafted with precision." Mrs. Hawthorne, her silk dress rustling, leaned forward. "A message, Miss Marple. Surely it was sabotage meant to ruin me before the flower show?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Sabotage, perhaps, but not to destroy your roses, Mrs. Hawthorne. They were meant to survive, thanks to your lime compound, a secret known to few." Her gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. Dr. Hayworth shifted, his spectacles catching the light. "A curious affair, Miss Marple, but I've no part in it. My greenhouse holds no arsenic." Miss Finch's lips pursed. "Nor mine. This is Lydia's drama, as always." Mr. Thorne gripped his cane, his voice gruff. "Waste of good poison, if you ask me." Tommy Price, hovering by the door, flushed. His eyes darted to Emily, who sat pale and silent, her hands clasped tightly. Miss Marple drew the rose-engraved key from her pocket, holding it up. "This key, found by the village well, fits a lock, perhaps a shed, or a box. And this note," she produced the crumpled paper from the church, "speaks of lime, arsenic, and timing. Someone knew the roses would resist the poison, and they wanted us to know it." Emily's breath caught, and Miss Marple turned to her. "Emily, my dear, you've been quiet, but your studies in chemistry make you a keen observer. You knew your aunt's lime compound would neutralize the arsenic, didn't you?" Emily's eyes widened, her voice a whisper. "I only wanted to help." Miss Marple nodded, her tone gentle but firm. You used your chemistry knowledge to dilute the arsenic, knowing it would alarm without destroying. The note, the clasp from your bag, the glass stopper in the churchyard, these were cries for help, not malice. Dr. Hayworth cleared his throat. But the arsenic, where did she get it? Miss Marple's gaze turned to Mr. Thorne. Mr. Thorne, your cottage holds a bottle of arsenic, its cap askew. The key I found matches the lock on your old chemist's box, doesn't it? You lent Emily the arsenic, perhaps unknowingly, when she visited under the guise of seeking advice for her studies. Thorne's face darkened, but he nodded. She came asking about compounds. I didn't think. She's a clever girl. I never meant for this. Miss Finch, silent until now, spoke sharply. And what of me? The village thinks I'm jealous enough to poison Lydia's roses. Miss Marple smiled. Your rivalry, Miss Finch, was a convenient distraction. The green stains on your trowel and gloves were from copper sulfate, not arsenic. A red herring, perhaps, but not your doing. Emily's clues pointed suspicion your way, but you're innocent of this. Mrs. Hawthorne rose, her voice trembling. Emily, how could you, after all I've done? Emily's tears spilled over. I'm sorry, Aunt Lydia. I just wanted to be free. Miss Marple placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. The young often act in haste, but their hearts are true. This village thrives on forgiveness, Mrs. Hawthorne. Perhaps it's time for a new understanding. The room fell silent, the lamplight flickering on the roses, their petals a silent witness to the truth. Dr. Hayworth's shed, Miss Finch's rivalry, and Thorne's arsenic had been threads in Emily's desperate plan. But the heart of the mystery was a girl's longing for freedom, woven into the village's quiet life. As the group dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the roses. Secrets bloom like flowers, she murmured, but truth always finds the light.
Chapter 10. Tea and Truth. The morning sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a gentle glow, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, where the scent of freshly brewed tea mingled with the faint perfume of her own roses outside. The village, nestled in the quiet embrace of autumn, had settled into its familiar rhythm after the revelations at Lilac Cottage the previous evening. The mystery of the arsenic that spared Mrs. Hawthorne's Rosamundi had been unraveled, its threads of motive and misdirection laid bare by Miss Marple's keen insight. Now, over a pot of Darjeeling and a plate of warm scones, she prepared to explain the final pieces to her friend, Mrs. Dolly Bantry, who sat across from her, eyes wide with anticipation. The parlor was a haven of coziness, its chintz chairs and polished oak table bathed in soft light. Cherry, Miss Marple's maid, bustled in with a tray, her cockney cheer undimmed by the early hour. "Here's your tea, miss," she said, setting down the pot. "And Mrs. Bantry, you're in for a treat. Miss Marple's got that look like she's solved the world's secrets." Dolly leaned forward, her voice a delighted whisper. "Jane, you simply must tell me everything. Emily, of all people, behind that rose business, I'm positively agog." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to her thoughts. "It was a simple matter, Dolly. Once the threads came together, the roses themselves told the story, as they always do in St. Mary Mead." She poured the tea, the steam curling like a village rumor. Emily Hawthorne, you see, was trapped in her aunt's shadow. Lilac Cottage, for all its beauty, was a cage for her, a place of wealth but little freedom. Her chemistry studies gave her the knowledge to dilute the arsenic, ensuring it would alarm without harming the roses, which she knew were protected by her aunt's lime compound. Dolly's eyes widened. That lime compound! How clever of Lydia to use it! But how did Emily know it would work? Miss Marple smiled.
Mrs. Hawthorne shared the formula with her gardener, Mr. Grayson, but Emily, being curious and clever, had access to her aunt's papers. She'd read her late uncle's notes tucked away in the cottage's library. She understood the compound's neutralizing effect on arsenic, a fact not widely known, which made her plan bold but safe. Dolly buttered a scone, her brow furrowed. "But the clues, Jane, the glass shard, the stopper in the churchyard, that note in the pew. Why leave such a trail?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. Emily wanted to be caught, in a way. The shard in the garden, the stopper by the oak, the note with its cryptic words, lime, arsenic, timing, were cries for attention. She hoped to frighten her aunt into leaving St. Mary Mead, perhaps selling Lilac Cottage, so she and young Tommy Price could start a life together. But she also left clues to ensure her plan wouldn't spiral into true harm. "And Mr. Thorne's arsenic?" Dolly asked, leaning closer. "How did Emily get hold of it?" Miss Marple's needles paused. Mr. Thorne, embittered by his dismissal from the Hawthorne Company, kept a chemist's hoard in his cottage. Emily visited under the pretense of seeking advice for her studies. He lent her a small quantity of arsenic, unaware of her intent. The rose-engraved key I found by the well fit his old chemist's box where he stored such things. He was careless, but not culpable. Dolly shook her head. And Miss Finch? The village was sure she was the jealous culprit. Miss Marple chuckled. Miss Finch's rivalry with Mrs. Hawthorne was a perfect distraction. The green stains on her trowel and gloves were copper sulfate, not arsenic, a gardener's tool, not a poisoner's. Emily's clues, like the stopper in the churchyard where Miss Finch often sat, pointed suspicion her way, but it was misdirection, not malice. Dolly set down her cup, her voice soft. "Poor Emily. All for love, then?" "Love and a longing for freedom," Miss Marple said. Young Tommy, with his earnest heart, was her partner in dreams, not in crime. His digging in the churchyard, hiding the glass, was his attempt to protect her. But love, like roses, can grow wild if not tended. Dolly sighed. "And what of Dr. Hayworth? I thought his greenhouse was the source of all this." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Dr. Hayworth's botanical experiments made him a suspect, especially with his cousin's connection to the Hawthorne family. The green sheen in his shed's puddle and his nervous manner suggested guilt, but it was merely coincidence. His arsenic was medicinal, locked away, and his key didn't match the one I found. He was a red herring, as the village so loves to create. Cherry poked her head in, her apron dusted with flour. "Sounds like the whole village was in a tizzy for nothing, miss. What's to become of Emily now?" Miss Marple smiled. "Mrs. Hawthorne, though shaken, has a heart beneath her pride. She's agreed to fund Emily's studies in Oxford, giving her the freedom she craved. Tommy's found work with a nursery in the next village, and they'll court properly, under the sun, not in shadows. St. Mary Mead forgives its own, Cherry." Dolly clapped her hands. "Jane, you're a marvel. You saw it all. The lime, the love, the little clues. How do you do it?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. "People are like gardens, Dolly. They show their secrets in the smallest details. A petal out of place, a word unspoken. You only need to look closely." The fire crackled, its warmth wrapping the room like the village's embrace. Outside, St. Mary Mead hummed with its quiet life. Children laughing on the green, the postman's bicycle bell, the soft rustle of leaves. The mystery of the poison that wouldn't kill had bloomed and faded, leaving the village richer in understanding, if not in roses. As Dolly rose to leave, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to her garden, where her own peace roses glowed in the morning light. Truth, like a rose, needs care to bloom, and St. Mary Mead is never short of either.